Oda has just revealed a figure truly worthy of the title of Lurking Legend, who may very well be by far Luffy's greatest challenge to date, and whose very existence could cause the beginning of the end of the One Piece world. At the moment, not enough eyes are on Elbaph. The world thinks that this big prophesized final war is going to be a clash between pirates, marines, and revolutionaries, but the true beginning of Ragnarok seems to be staring us right in the face with an unnervingly familiar smile and an even more familiar title being the Sun God. But there's a big difference between Loki and everyone else who has ever called themselves a god in One Piece, which is that when it comes to Loki, I actually believe him. And we'll get into why after I bring your attention to the Calm Belt, which is a channel currently undertaking the project of re-editing the Grand Line Review video library into themed compilations. Very long videos perfect for your very long form activities like driving, drawing, gaming, sleeping, whatever it is you do for extended periods of time, we've got you covered for as long as it takes, with no need to pause what you're doing and pick a new video every 15 minutes or so. They're not just compilations either, because throughout the years there have been what I refer to as lost videos. And these are Grand Line Review projects that were fully written, recorded, and edited. However, for various different reasons, were never published. I'm not going to tell you where they are, how many there are, or even what they are though, because that's not really in the spirit of One Piece, is it? My videos, well, they're yours if you want them. I left everything I own in the link in the description. So if this new long form channel meets your needs, then please do check it out and make sure to subscribe, because that is insanely important for small channels, and I look forward to seeing you there. But for now, let's get back to you, me. Thanks, me. We're starting this chapter with some pretty bad news though. Although this was news that I would say was fairly predictable. I mean, I can't count the amount of times that I said the world government are going to blame Vegapunk's death on Luffy, but they didn't accomplish this alone. We do need to point out that all of this is because Big News Morgan's already decided that Luffy was going to be the villain of this story, and he did so before the Egghead Siege even took place. And this is one of those situations where you can see a lot of Oda in Morgan's, because he's constructing the news to tell the most compelling story. And things are gonna be real boring if the truth gets out there and the whole world just supports Luffy. And there is a bit of a trend happening here, because Morgan slandered Sabo as well for the Cobra incident. So this bird is on a warpath with these brothers, claiming that Sabo killed Cobra, Luffy killed Vegapunk, and Ace killed the idea of ever innocently enjoying a donut ever again, because now I can't look at one without thinking about him. I also love the photo selection of Luffy. It's an article about essentially a pirate terrorist killing a beloved old man. And that photo of Luffy, he looks so happy about it. But the face is definitely not the major focus of that picture. One of the most curious parts of this chapter is when it's clocked that Gear 5th Luffy has an alabaster X on his arm. So I didn't realize what was happening here at first, and I started to wonder if I was going a bit crazy. I don't know, getting old now, I've been told that happens. And I was thinking to myself, mate, there's no way that this X could have been here all along, and Oda somehow just always positioned Luffy to avoid showing it. Sort of like how, again, all of a sudden, Emmett had an X on his arm in the flashback with Joy Boy that we didn't see on him in the modern day. But that is definitely not the case. What's happened here is almost certainly Vivi's doing. Big News Morgan's is the one in charge of printing these newspapers, and I think that Vivi has either convinced him to print this photo with an X added, or Vivi has sneakily inserted an X herself without Morgan's knowing. And she's done this as a way to send a message to the Straw Hats that she's alive, and even telling them how to find her. Because if they do the logic math, then all they need to do is track down Big Bird. And this is where we finally get the answer as to why Oda chose the original 6 Straw Hats to go to Legoland. Because the remaining Straw Hats who see this news article were not present for this mark of fellowship, and they don't know its meaning. But as soon as one of the original 6 sees this, they're gonna put it together, and at some point, I think we'll be heading out to retrieve Vivi. It's quite a clever move from Vivi, and I think she may have gotten the idea from Luffy himself, specifically when he was purposely photographed with a 3D 2Y message on his arm. Because we did see Vivi reacting to this photo, and after dismissing that it could have been some sort of fashion statement, I imagine that she was able to figure out what was being said here, especially because the Straw Hats reunited 2 years later, so that confirms the 2Y part of the theory, or at the very least make it incredibly obvious what happened in retrospect. But also making big news are big men Dory and Broggy, because their big bounties have now been raised to an even bigger 1.8 billion berries each. Not combined, each. And as things currently stand, Dory and Broggy are tied for the 13th highest bounty number in the entire series, narrowly being beaten by Sir Crocodile, who has approximately 1.9 billion, although it's a big jump after that because we have Luffy, Law, and Kid at 3 billion each. So I'm seeing a lot of absolutely flawed reactions to this, people whose heads are exploding because how can these two be worth this much? Especially considering that they were both almost killed by Galdino, the Candle Man, and as far as we know, he's still stuck at 124 million berries. But there are two reasons why this makes absolute sense. And the first is something I've commented about before because I never miss a chance to discuss fictional inflation. But I've always believed that Dory and Broggy have been severely undervalued by the fan base because they see 100 million berries each and they think to themselves, what trash. Every supernova we met on Sabadi was worth more than that. Giants are suck. But this is 100 million berries 100 years ago. And 100 years ago, you could buy a house for like a couple of $1,000s. And so the bounty increase for Dory and Broggy is actually remarkably similar to what inflation would have done in reality. Because if you plug $100,000 into the inflation calculator starting in 1924, then today that amount would be worth 1.8 million. I did try doing 100 million, but the calculator wouldn't let me. Too big of a number. Maybe $100 million didn't exist in 1924. I don't know. But after doing that, I do genuinely think that Oda plugged these numbers into a calculator, and that's how he came up with the 1.8 billion number, because it matches pretty perfectly. Meaning that if our worst generation had been active a century ago instead of not being born yet, then their notorious rookie bounties would have been sitting somewhere around 5 to 6 million berries, which is less than the Meow Band brothers are worth in the modern day as they go for 7 million apiece. Things were much simpler back in the day, less people dressing up as cats, I imagine. But the other reason why Dory and Broggy are now worth this much is because it's been my belief that these two were always supposed to have this level of strength and notoriety. They were introduced on Little Garden with the plan of being endgame characters, and the only reason why they feel so weak is because One Piece has taken a quarter of a century longer to complete than Oda originally thought it would, and so these early characters have been a bit left in the dust in terms of power scaling. In fact, the same thing happened with Crocodile. He was always supposed to be one of the world's major threats, but because he appeared so accidentally early, his alabaster and even impel down performance doesn't really stack up to the narrative status he holds. But Dory and Broggy are meant to be a big deal, and that's why they're being treated as such, which I think makes the revelation of Loki that much more terrifying, because giants, they are no joke, but Loki makes every other giant look like a joke. And we'll get to him in a bit because, Firstly, though, some initial thoughts about Elbaph itself, because we were blessed with such a clear shot of its landscape in this chapter, and it's pretty damn magnificent. I think that this is some of Oda's finest location work, maybe even a magnum opus, because I really don't know how he's ever going to top this. It reminds me a lot of Wano when we got the first full landscape shot, which Oda has cited as his favorite drawing that he's ever done in One Piece. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, how can we spend any less than 2 years exploring this colossal island? We spent 4 years on Wano and we still never really dived too deeply into more than half the country. We got to know Onigashima, the flower capital, and I guess Kuri pretty well, but the rest of it was left very underexplored. And I don't want that for Elbaph, because what this has done is that it has furiously activated my open world senses. In fact, seeing Luffy and the other Straw Hats step outside and hop on that bridge, it was like being in Elden Ring and stepping into the mountaintops of the giants. It's also finally being confirmed that Elbaph is officially spelled with a PH, which is a win for the official translation, which has been going with that since the beginning. Although I think a bit of a loss for the fans who liked the idea of Elbaph being the spelling of Fable backwards. But what I love is that when Luffy's group actually get outside the landscape, it is massive. We're on a huge castle built on top of these grand snowy mountains, and it's like we're already at the pinnacle of what most islands could offer. But then you see the first full shot of Elbaph with a PH, and you can see that where we are, this grand landscape is right down the bottom, and it is absolutely nothing compared to the full island. And that what the maximum of any other island has to offer us is just the starting zone of Elbaph. So what Oda very effectively did here is slowly prep us for the full scale of what Elbaph is, starting with a diorama castle, then we got outside and we see a full castle, and then we see the full island, which makes the full castle feel like the diorama castle. Whatever your feelings on Road and the Lego world are, it did its job. Because I don't think it would have been effective if we just, did a bit of a sail, rocked up and saw the island. I don't think we would have gotten that full sense of scale. And something I'm very curious about is that huge sword that seems to pass through several layers of the Yggdrasil tree, because this is easily the single largest object that has ever been depicted in One Piece. Nothing else even comes close. And it raises the question of, was this built for, architectural purposes, a bit of aesthetic flair for Warland? Or was this a blade once used by a colossal ancient being? And will it be used again? Is this Chekhov's a big Viking sword? Is Luffy going to see this and think, ooh, it'd be fun to swing that around? Or does Loki have some sort of plan with it? Speaking of, we need to talk about this guy, because Loki's design is, I think, better than anyone could have predicted, because what we have happening here is a reverse One Piece. Usually what happens is we get intimidating silhouette that turns out to be a bit of a derpy character design, but here Loki was given a comical silhouette and has been revealed as what is, in my opinion, opinion, one of the hardest character designs we've ever seen in the One Piece. Loki got the full Kaido treatment. Remember that notorious silhouette of Kaido from Water 7 that transformed into one of the craziest designs in the series? And I'd also compare Loki to Katakuri just in terms of the coolness factor and the absurd amount of detail. If you're one of Oda's assistants, you've got to see a character like this and initially you're awestruck, it's beautiful and epic, but then you would surely get hit with a shot of dread as you realize that this is what you need to draw every time Loki appears in the manga. This is not an easy design to bring to life, especially with all the tattoos, because stuff like that is a nightmare to keep track of at all of the different angles that Oda likes to use. But this is yet another thing that separates One Piece from most other shonen. Very few authors are able to put in the superhuman effort to bring these sorts of designs to life. And I have to say, one of my first thoughts is that this was the man that Charlotte Lola rejected. And if I were Gotti of the Fire Tank Pirates who recently married Lola, I'd be feeling just a little bit nervous about that fact. Lola, by the way, proposed to over 4,000 people, including every male member of the Straw Hat Pirates, even Chopper and Brook. However, she only ever rejected one man, that man being Loki, who seems to be a combination of every villain we've ever faced. You can definitely detect some Doflamingo in him because of the tongue and the twisted smile. You've also got the brute rawness of Kaido, but strangest of all is that his face reminds me of a sort of Gigantamax Django. And I think there's even a bit of Doc Q in there, although I might just be saying that because of the hair. But I think it's pretty fair to speculate that what we're looking at here may be the major antagonist of this arc. That might not be how it turns out, but it probably is because he killed his father for the sake of magical fruit, and that's a story that sounds very familiar, a bit Blackbeard-esque. So as presented to us, it sure does feel like we have quite the bad dude on our hands here, which is why Oda has gone so overboard with the design, because with new One Piece antagonists, there is no option other than to do that. Oda has an incredible and very unenviable challenge post-Wano in One Piece, which is that it is so difficult to make any antagonist seem like a threat to Luffy after Gear 5th. Even a full complement of old men on Egghead Island, I don't think ever quite got to that point. There were some pretty awesome monsters and horrifying whenever they were interacting with characters that weren't Luffy, but there was never a stage where this felt like a true challenge to Luffy. But with just one panel of Loki, I get that feeling. This 2-page spread is, I think, one of the most epic and memorable, not just this year, not even in the last few years, but probably ever, because this feels like Luffy walking into a boss battle that even he is underleveled for. And you know what it is? It's the smile. Even in this position, Loki is still grinning from ear to ear. That's not something that the Five Elders or even Kaido had going for them. They were never able to challenge Luffy on that high ideological level. They weren't able to reach Luffy's wavelength of enjoyment and freedom, and so they seriously lacked the substance to deal with him. With Loki, though, he looks like he's having the time of his life. Even having been chained for however many decades it's been, I don't get the feeling that this man is unhappy with this situation. Even confined to the depths of Elbaph's snowy, hellish conditions, even here, Loki looks much more happier and feels much more free than anyone in his situation has the right to. And of course he does, because that's when we get the bombshell that Loki is yet another person who refers to himself as the sun god and a man who believes that he is destined to destroy the world. Assumedly through some sort of fictional pirate Ragnarok. But Loki terrifies me because he has that, that Luffy vibe about him. The idea that no matter what situation Luffy gets put into, if he says he's going to become the Pirate King, then I believe it. He has a willpower that transcends the page he's drawn on. And I don't know how Oda does it, but I get that same feeling from Loki. The fact that even if he's in this situation, I believe him when he says he's going to destroy the world. It really does feel like this is a person to rival Luffy's ambition and become the greatest challenge that Luffy has ever faced. And realistically, if Elbaph is going to be a full arc, then Loki would need to be. One Piece doesn't go backwards, we only ever escalate, and after an arc where we fought all 5 Elder Stars, there's not a lot of room left before we hit that ceiling. But Loki, despite his size, or perhaps even because of it, looks like he could fit in perfectly. And this may even be why Oda emphasized Luffy becoming a giant so much in Gear 5th, because he's going to need that giant form to fight and bring down Loki. And it's not lost on me that Loki currently occupies a very similar role to that of Fenrir, the great wolf who was bound and destined to remain that way until Ragnarok, after which point he will go on to kill Odin, and in some versions of the myth, it's even said that Fenrir will devour the sun itself. And I guess the question that we need to ask right now is, will Luffy free Loki and accidentally begin Ragnarok?